Good morning. I'm Reverend Mark Hammond, and on behalf of Eileen's family, I'd like to welcome everyone to this celebration of the life of Eileen Motton, and to thank you all for being here. Eileen's family would also like to invite everyone to a light lunch and a time of fellowship and continued remembering after the service, right here downstairs in Wadsworth Hall. We won't be going to the cemetery today. Eileen and Fred, who are now together, will be laid to rest very soon, but not today. Today is a time to celebrate, a time to say goodbye. Today is a time to remember the gift we were given and to comfort one another as we comfort the family. Today is a time to pray and seek comfort from God. It's good that we are here together. At times like this, it's good to remember Christ's promise to all of us that when two or more of us gather in His name, He's here with us. I now invite you to join me in our opening prayer, which is printed in the bulletin and will be up on the screen so that we can all pray together. Dear friends, let us pray. Eternal God, in whom we live and move and have our being, be present with us now. Draw us near and embrace us within your infinite love. Transform the burden of our pain or doubt into the freedom of faithfulness. Bless us with your healing touch. Amen. And may our hearts be comforted and our souls touched by this music. as the notes of music lead us through our grief and towards healing, it's now time for us to hear words of remembrance and love. Eileen's sons have chosen to speak to you today in birth order. And so at this time, I'd like to invite Eric to come forward, and then Roy.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to everyone that's here today. Thank you to everyone that's been here today with us to share with us, and those of you that are online, thank you for also being here. It means a lot to us that you're here. I know some of you have made great effort to come great distances to come. Some of you have had to fight through the traffic this morning just to come. Not so far away, but also had a tough time to get here. Thank you for being here. Some are still not here, yeah. I've really appreciated all the cards and letters and emails from so many of you in the last couple of weeks. And they mean a lot to us. Your reminiscences about Mom have awakened a new spirit in me, because many of you had a very different relationship with my mom than I had. I moved out of the house about 50 years ago, and I've come back for weekends now and then, but many of you were much, much closer to her than I have been, it feels so. But I've really appreciated all your reminiscences about her. She was a stay-at-home mom for me. There was not much that changed. She was always in the same house. She lived in the same house for 66 years, all of my life, basically. She had her strong opinions. She always kept us on the straight and narrow. Someone said last night that they found her to be sweet, and I talked about Linda with this, and I never thought of her as sweet myself. I just thought of her as a strong woman, and so anyway, that was an awakening for me that I had not had before. So she had the same living room furniture, the same lamps in the house that were just there always. She stuck to her guns often, and when she started with an endeavor, she carried on with it. She didn't go from pillar to post. She was with the IODE for 77 years. They were members of this church for their pretty much, Mom about 80 odd years, and Dad after they got married. So anyway, she loved her family. Many of our vacations were spent going to visit with family, either in Toronto or wherever they were, and Windsor often. So she had an encyclopedic memory for dates and family names, and that was always amazing. She didn't need to go to the genealogy books. She told us stories about family history, and I loved hearing her reminiscences again about relatives that were forgotten by most of us. I will miss those talks with her. She had a bit of an adventurous side too. When I joined the fire department about 40 years ago, Dad always said he was worried about my safety on the fire department. At the same time, I bought a motorcycle, and Mom thought she always said that she was more worried about my safety on the motorcycle. So I would ride my bike down to Montreal and come for a visit, and I'd ask Dad if he wanted to go for a ride with me, and he always said, "No way, no way," always the same answer. And when I asked Mom, she said, "Sure." So she was over 50 years old, and she'd get on the back of my Triumph 750, and off I'd take her to work or to her bridge club or wherever. She was always up for an adventure. So I wish I had some photos of her riding with me to share with you. As I stated earlier, Mom always had a meal on the table. I think I forgot to mention that earlier, but she always had meals on the table. Cooking was big for her. Often, when it was a big occasion like Thanksgiving, Christmas, it was a big family do. Anytime visitors came, it was a big meal. Anytime I came home, it was a big meal. I felt like the prodigal son coming home oftentimes, and Roy and Tanya used to comment that, oh, kill the fatted calf, Eric's coming, So anyway, Mom had a great homemade bread recipe, and I think Linda has the same recipe. And after I got married, I asked her if I could have the recipe, because I always loved her homemade bread. And every time I made it, it never tasted quite as good as what Mom could make it. It never did. But growing up, Mom would make 6 or 8 loaves of bread, and we would smell that wonderful smell in the house. And she would send 7 of the 8 to the church for the bazaar. And we would get a loaf that the 4 of us guys could demolish in about 10 minutes at a meal. And that was our taste of bread. And all this wonderful bread would go up to the church. And one year, Roy and I were asked to take these loaves of bread up to the church for the bazaar. So anyway, we only delivered about 5 of them, and we gave 50 cents each to the church, because that was the price on them, and we bought them for ourselves. Didn't tell Mom. We stuffed the loaves in our top drawer of our dressers at home, and we would tear off a chunk after school and enjoy a treat, and Mom did the laundry one time, and she found the loaves of bread in our top drawers. Well, she was mad, wondering why this bread had not made it to the church. And we said, well, we paid for it. We just wanted it for ourselves. She was not pleased about that. Whether we were at a picnic at the Montreal Live Steamers track or even in PI, she would always make wonderful meals. Mom and Dad also enjoyed lots of travel together. They did many cruises, and they went square dancing, conventions. They went to IOD conventions all over Canada, the US, and they enjoyed all of those things. So I'm thankful that, as Dad used to say, they shared a great life together, and they both managed to get the most out of life together. I'm glad that they are now both reunited here and in heaven. They were and always will be a great team. We will miss them both, but we are very thankful that we were able to have such great parents for such a long time. Thank you.
This is hard. You okay, Owen? Okay. Almost feel like I want to applaud after what Eric said. I got to read all this, but before I do, I got to speak from the heart. This community surrounded Mom all her life. They meant the world to her. These people came forward of their own volition. Family was everything to her. I got a card in the mail. I won't read who it's from, but it was most appreciated. Dear Roy, please accept my deepest sympathy. Your mother was a shining example of all her IOD stands for. She was a good friend and will be greatly missed by all who knew her. May she rest in peace. That says a lot. So now I'll go to the script. And I'll put the tears away. I hope. Mom was born November the 8th, 1927, at the Women's General Hospital on Tupper Street in Westmount. We know it as the Ready Memorial, but she goes before that. As a little girl, she had fond memories of their home on Wicksteed in town of Mount Royal. One of her earliest memories was the R-100 airship over Montreal when she was just shy of 3 years old. Note the condition of the Sun Life building. In 1942, the family moved to Strathern in Montreal West, a family home that still occupied by family, and joined the congregation of Montreal West United Church. Mom completed school at Montreal West High School, but their graduating class opted not to do a yearbook as part of rationing for the war effort. So I got no photo. Eileen went off to work delivering telegrams for CNCP Telegraph after landing a job in the stenotyping pool in the Sun Life building. Mom and Dad first met at an IODE meeting at 152 Wolseley, and then again at the streetcar stop in front of the Royal Bank here on Westminster. The Sun Life building was undergoing an expansion, and years later she would work there, which Dad always remarked on, how he married the prettiest girl from the Sun Life building, where Dad always said, all the pretty girls worked. This image is from one of their first dates, where they took photographs of one another rowing in a small boat, and thus began their courtship. They joined the Sports Motor Car Club, formed lasting bonds with members that lasted for life, and they attended funerals of many of those members. Mom served as navigator and co-captain for many a rally in rural Quebec, long before the network of asphalt paved roads existed as we know them today. In August of 1948, satirical cartoonist Al Cap, here we go, introduced a family of new characters called Shmoo. Well, they started dating and got engaged around that time, so Mom was Mrs. Shmoo, hence the little Shmoo on the table. And when Mom first passed, GK posted on Facebook, Mrs. Shmoo, come home. Affectionately a pseudonym for Mom that he called her until his dying days. On the back of your bulletin, you'll see Mom said invest 10%. Well, she never really said it. She did it and pushed Dad to do the same. He jumped in with no life jacket. We realize now what a blue-collar worker and an administrative assistant can accomplish when both are on the same journey together. Mom was thrifty and could spend two sides of every dollar, clipping coupons and looking for bargains until the last month of her life. Expo 67 was where Mom took the three of us every day of that centennial year. Now, Mom was born when Canada was 60 years old. This is when Canada was 100. Every day she'd pack our Army surplus radio bags with carefully prepared peanut butter and banana or peanut butter and honey sandwiches with a Steinberg's Ice Castle drink wrapped in newspaper to keep it cold. Dad recognized the value and caliber of that successful World's Fair on his first visit in May, and with Mom's consent, her consent, they invested in the passports for the whole season. We saw almost every pavilion and enjoyed many a show, none quite as much as Mom enjoyed the steel drum bands or mariachi group from Mexico. In this photo, we were watching the radio-controlled icebreakers behind the Canadian pavilion, and that's Harvey in the middle. Mom and Dad enjoyed square dancing in many churches and on some cruises in several countries. You may wonder why there's a monarch on the front of your bulletin. We lost our Queen Elizabeth II after a 70-year reign, but know that Mom witnessed 3 monarchs before her. Why the IODE meant so much to her. Society benefited from her many contributions. After her list of gifts to charities included Canadian Hearing Society, Red Cross, Welcome Home Mission, NDG Food Depot, Multiple Sclerosis Society, this church, and others, Sun Youth, the list goes on. She gave not only of her money, but also her time. Her grandchildren were a constant source of joy to her, and we would hear her speak of them with pride on many occasions when with family and friends. She cherished her brief time with her great-granddaughter, Claire. And if you stay for the slideshow downstairs, you'll see many pictures of them all. Dad showed off his craftsmanship every year with his annual Christmas gift of one thing. Mom got a new dish mop. That's it. That was her gift from Dad. It was carefully crafted to resemble something else every year. And it camouflaged another gift from Santa Claus or precluded an envelope from Santa. In the case of this dish mop on the table here, it was a Caribbean cruise on the New Amsterdam. We all remember red for Fred and green for Eileen. Those are nautical lights for port and starboard. They're file folders, towels, camping gear, and wardrobe, often reflected the same red and green. As we go through their files now, we find red files with Mom's taxes, green files with Dad's medical receipts. So simple, but that's them. Eileen and Fred's lifetime boat ride was and is what we would call a relationship. Thank you.
As we continue to reflect on those images and relationships, Eileen herself chose our music this morning, and our first hymn is Will Your Anchor Hold, number 675. this time, I'd like to invite Chike to come forward.
My notes. Memories of Mum. Roy covered some of the Expo stuff. I have a few memories of Mum at Expo. My earliest memories at home. In early July 1969, Mum and Dad went out and bought a new television set because there's a news item coming up that they did not want to miss. I remember sitting on Mum's lap in the rocking chair as we watched Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Collins, the one we always forget, going up on this ultimate adventure, man's first trip to the moon. And I remember how Mum would cringe as she watched these two big burly astronauts going through that little hatch to get into the lunar landing module, and the two of them squeezing themselves in there in this box that's about the size of a washing machine, and then launching out to the moon's surface. Just the claustrophobia of that all, she just almost couldn't take it, but she had to watch because she loved travel so much. And this was the ultimate travel that mankind had ever embarked upon. Mum's love of travel probably came from her parents. Her dad, Grandpa Reed, worked for Canadian National, and he got passes. As a teenager, she had gone down to Prince Edward Island with the family, and which, in Grandpa's way of travel, meant they took the train to New Brunswick. They took the boat to PEI, took a narrow gauge train to Stanhope Beach Lodge, stayed there for 3 weeks, and turned around and came home. And she wanted to see more of the island. Surprising she wanted to travel so much, it didn't reveal in her personal history. She only had 4 addresses in her entire life, 3 of them within a kilometer of this church. And the first one, the one she was born in, was only 8 kilometers away. But she wanted to travel, and she tried and tried for 18 years. She tried to convince Dad to go back to Prince Edward Island, and finally, 2 weeks after Collins and Armstrong and Aldrin returned, we loaded up the kids and the camping equipment into the old Meteor, and away we went to Prince Edward Island. That was '69. Didn't take much convincing. Dad wanted to go again in '71, and again in '73. And in '74, we started that way. We got down to our first stop, which was a campground in Maine, and we pulled a Stanhope Beach Lodge. We stayed there for 3 weeks, and we folded up the tent and came home. But every odd-numbered year from 1969 till 1993, with the exception of one, Mum and Dad went to Prince Edward Island. They went other places on even-numbered years. And Mum always had a meditative streak in her. No matter what we were doing, we would go to northern Maine. There was a section of a railway that was being restored. But right at the end of that track, there used to be a covered bridge. This bridge abutment was still there next to the Sandy River with the stream flowing down. And Mum would sit on that rock and knit. We all had toques and mitts and scarves and sweaters made from Mum's hands. This blanket here, it was the last of 9 of these Afghans that she knit, some of which won prizes at Ormstown Fair. And the sharing. Later they started square dancing, and that took them all over the world at various things. When Dad couldn't dance anymore, Mom took up carpet bowling. And they always played bridge. And between the bridge clubs and the bowling and the square dancing and the train clubs and the this and the UCW and the that, Mom was always baking something. She had her coconut chocolate squares, and she had her apricot balls, and she had her shortbread cookies. And IODE means I often don't eat. But the hospitality, Eric spoke about that, laying out the big table. I had a Quebecoise girlfriend. She came to the house for Christmas dinner, I believe it was. It was the first time ever with an English family, and she couldn't figure out the math in this family because there's 12 people in the house, and there's 12 places around the table, and they're all beautifully laid with the silverware and the 100-year-old bread and butter plate and the wine glass and the punch glass, and she's saying, "Y a-t-il un autre qui s'en vient? Is somebody else coming?" No, tout le monde est là. Everybody's here. But she can't figure this out because there's 12 people in the house and there's 12 seats at the table, and everybody is in and out of the kitchen. And she thought this was insane because in the Quebecois tradition, when Mama is preparing a family dinner, you dare not set foot in her kitchen. No, you get to set one foot in her kitchen and you're going to take a soup ladle, run it upside the... Sorry, Mark. But everybody's in and out of the kitchen, brothers and sisters, and if we had a dog, he'd be in there too, and he'd be welcome in there because we need somebody to clean up the floor. And so very uncertain of herself, she walks into the kitchen with us, and she's walking on thin ice. She's not sure what the reaction is going to be, and Mom hands her 2 big baskets of homemade bread and says, "Put those on the little table next to my place." Well, that's raised more questions than it's answered, really. So I grab a casserole full of candied yams, and I walk out to the dining room with her, and I point out the little table over in the corner. She puts the 2 baskets of bread next to 2 big pitchers of fruit punch and 1 bottle of wine. And she's looking at the wine. We're 11 adults going to be sitting down to this meal, and there's 1 bottle of wine. And I said, "Don't worry about that. Mom and Dad will finish off the leftovers by Thursday or Friday." And everybody's coming out of the kitchen now, and Mom comes out of the kitchen carrying something or other, and she says, "Well, everybody's seen the centerpiece now. I guess we can take it up and put it on the buffet, because 60-odd years of making this family dinner 3 or 4 times a year or 5 times a year, whatever number of holidays or people coming over and everything else, not once did the centerpiece last on the table until grace." And then everybody's sitting down, and the last one coming in is Eric, and he's carrying a great big stack of plates warm from the oven, and he puts them in front of Dad, and he sits down. And Dad says grace. And Ramon didn't pay much attention to the grace because she's looking up and down the table, and there's Dad, and there's Big Brother, and sister-in-law, and brother, and all the way around the table. And there is Mom. Because in the Quebecois tradition, when you have that family dinner like that, Mom is in the kitchen ladling out the soup, and the soup plates go into the dining room, and Mom is in the kitchen ladling out the main course, and while everybody's eating the main course, Mom is in the kitchen preparing dessert. And we're all here, and there's food all over the table, and everybody's sitting down. And next thing you know, she's got a plate in front of her from Dad with turkey and a bit of stuffing. And I said, "You see that big honking spoon in front of your place? Well, you scoop out whatever's in front of you, and then you pass the plate on. And the plate goes around the table, and you scoop onto the next one, and when a full plate comes back at you, that's your supper." And everybody was served in 4 minutes. And we're all eating together. And then there's a little bit of chaos goes on, and finally we're sitting back, and we're all absolutely stuffed. And we've had the pumpkin pie and the trifle, and we're having our coffee out of the little porcelain bone china cups. And we're all in this turkey tryptophan-induced stupor. And somebody says, "Man, that was good. Who's up for pizza?" Because one of the things with raising 3 boys was we were having a competition to see how wide we could get Mom's eyes to open. I'm going to blame Reverend Alice for this. She's my minister out in St. Andrews in Chattagee. A minister gives you a message on Sunday. A good minister gives you something you're still thinking about Sunday evening. A great minister gives you something you're still thinking about on Wednesday. Well, Reverend Alice gave me something I'm thinking about 11 years later. In your life, make a list of the most beautiful sights you have ever seen, the most beautiful sounds you have ever heard. And it's not a rank ordering thing, and it's widely varied. I'll tell you, all the ones I'm going to share with you involve Mom. But I'll tell you the most beautiful sounds I've ever heard. Sitting right over here in Bethlehem Isle at 10 years old, when Eric Adams played Toccata and Fugue on this organ. Incredible. Also, the most incredible sound I've ever heard was a steam locomotive with a heavy train struggling to get it up a hill on wet rail. And I've just split the crowd because 90% of you are looking at me and saying, "Huh?" And those of us that are railway people just had a shiver go down their spine and we're saying, "Yes!" But the most beautiful smells in the world. Sunrise, the offshore breeze coming down Oyster Bed Bridge Bay during the potato harvest. More incredible than that, the Rose Garden at Butchart Gardens, Victoria, BC. Even more incredible than that, a northern Maine pine forest in the 20 minutes after a thunderstorm. But I will tell you the most amazing smell in the entire world is Mom's kitchen. On the day she made the homemade bread.
Okay. For those beautiful words and memories and sounds that now will stay with us, the way the smell of your mother's bread remains with you. And may these words of Scripture bring us all light and comfort. I'd like to invite Deborah and Tanya to come forward now.
Our first scripture is from Proverbs, chapter 31, verses 10 to 31. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant's ships. She brings her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She considereth a field, and buyeth it, and with the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She stretcheth out her hand to the poor, yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates, when he sitteth among the elders of the land. She maketh fine linen, and selleth it, and delivereth girdles into the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates.
Our next reading is from John chapter 6, verses 30 through 35. They say therefore unto him, What sign showeth thee, thou that we may see and believe thee? What dost thou work? Our father did eat manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Then Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, Moses give you not that bread from heaven, but my Father giveth you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is which cometh from the heaven, and giveth life unto the world. Then they say unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth in me shall never thirst. May God bless us with understanding of these holy words.
Preparing for this service this morning it felt different than other services I've prepared. For one thing, there was a lot less for me to do. Eileen had already thought about the service and made preparations, and what she didn't take care of herself, her amazing children, their amazing partners, and a few friends came together to plan. I usually have to help families choose scriptures, prayers, and music, but all of that was pretty much decided by the time I got involved. And didn't they do a superb job? But another reason this service felt different was that I usually like to personalize my reflections. I especially like to tell a few stories. I like to meet the families and learn their stories of their loved ones. And sometimes, even most often, families don't even realize they have stories until I help them find them. But that certainly wasn't a problem with this family. Let me tell you, the Mottons have stories, and they love to tell their stories. In fact, I realized that finding stories wasn't going to be the problem for this service, not the challenge. It was going to be controlling the great output of stories and the love that went with it. And I was especially concerned when I found out that Eric, Roy, and GK were all going to be sharing stories today, although I certainly think that was the right decision. I was especially worried when I found out that GK alone had written over 40 minutes of stories. and memories as of Wednesday night, and he was still working on it. And he must have had a truly great editor because he did a beautiful job.
No, they told half of them.
As did they all. You know, I discovered that Eileen was a big fan of Jeopardy and was pretty good at it. But that doesn't come as a surprise to me because she was very smart. She lived a long life, traveled, saw lots of things, and most of all, she lived her life with a husband and 3 sons who loved to learn. They who together are a virtual potpourri of fun facts and the history of pretty much everything. But while Motton men loved to spin a yarn, Eileen was the quiet one. She was the listener. She took it all in, and so I believe if she had ever gotten on Jeopardy, and if the categories had anything to do with trains, telephones, aviation, music, space exploration, travel, church, Expo 67, or the history of Montreal West, she would have absolutely cleaned up. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about thousands, we'd be talking about millions, right? Especially questions about church and Montreal West. Eileen grew up in this church. Eileen's father was the chair of the board, and Eileen was baptized by Reverend Ross himself almost a century ago. Reverend Ross still has family in this community, and Eileen used to proudly say to Reverend Ross's granddaughter, Helen Claire Ross, "Your grandfather baptized me." Eileen was married here too. Fred used to love to tell the story of how Reverend Wadsworth forgot to ask him to kiss Eileen during their wedding ceremony. But then Reverend Wadsworth didn't forget himself to give Eileen a congratulatory kiss when the service was over. Fred used to say, "He got to kiss her before I did." The Reeds and Mottons have blessed our community for decades and spent their lives in this community. As GK said, Eileen lived in 4 houses her entire life, all within 8 kilometers of here. Fred was a historian of this town, a guardian of the memories of this community and this church. They lived their lives here, they raised their family here, they served this community with dedication and generosity, and they taught their children to do the same. We've heard the stories of the IODE, 77 years. That's a lot of ditty bags. The train club, the travel club, the Red Cross, the depot, the food depot, and of course this place, and the women's group here. They absolutely lived for family and friends. They were social people. They loved square dancing, one of the most social forms of dancing. They loved card nights. And if you played against them, you better beware, because Eileen could count cards. Just like in the movie Rain Man. Forget Jeopardy, she could have cleaned up in Las Vegas. But for her, cards weren't for making money, they were for making friends. Though she also knew how to make money. Eileen's dad was a treasurer of the Grand Trunk Railway, and he must have taught his daughter a thing or two. From the time she held her first job, Eileen was already investing in stocks and bonds. As I already mentioned, she had a gift with numbers, and she would have made an excellent financial advisor or accountant. She did her own taxes and used only the long forms. I had to even look up what that was. Safe to say I don't use them. She knew how to invest. She also knew how to stretch a dollar. Like most people who grew up in the Depression, she knew the value of money and how to economize. Nothing was wasted. She bought in bulk. I mean in bulk. And she made things last. One of my favorite stories about Eileen was about how her kitchen, she had some non-perishables and spices with labels from Steinberg still on them. And yet her family never did without. They vacationed, they cruised, they rode the rails. They all had hobbies. They lived life to the fullest. Family dinners were epic, as GK mentioned, because it was him who told me the stories. For formal dinners, they were always elaborate centerpieces and dozens of bowls of food. There could be a dozen bowls of vegetables alone, maybe even more. but as busy and as warm and wonderful as those family dinners were, everyone together, Fred and Eileen also knew the importance of spending time together, and they had a little sanctuary on those busy family nights. After a meal, they'd find each other in the kitchen, and they'd do the dishes together every night. They always said that it was a perfect alone time, because if anyone intruded, they'd just offer them a dish towel and ask them to help, and that always got rid of everybody. Fred and Eileen had some pretty interesting traditions. Doing dishes was their alone time, and every Christmas, as GK mentioned, or was it Roy? I can't remember now, but they had this tradition that Fred would give her a dish mop. But the way I heard that story, he would decorate the dish mop into something else, and for instance, once it was a space shuttle and once it was a ship, and perhaps he was trying to tell her that what they were doing right there in the kitchen together every night of their lives was nurturing something that had transformed his life and taken him on a fantastic journey. Together they knew the secret of life didn't require a faraway mountaintop or the wealth of Solomon. The secret to life could be found in an ordinary kitchen and some warm, soapy water, which brings us to our reading. The second reading, the first one was self-explanatory, a celebration of a woman dedicated to her family. And what a profound blessing that is. But the second reading was about bread. Eileen made great bread, and I mean great bread. Though she shared her recipe with others, no one was able to replicate it. As every chef knows, there are always small details and little touches and judgments that lie between the lines of a recipe, and Eileen had absolutely perfected those. But our reading this morning really isn't about bread. Bread is only a metaphor. The reading is really about what truly sustains us in life, what life is really all about, because it is not about bread alone. There is also what Jesus called spiritual bread, that by which all spiritual beings are nourished. Things like belonging, family, having something to live for beyond ourselves, community, having people to care for, having connection, and most of all, having people to love and who love you. That is what life is really about, and how spiritual beings are really nurtured. Love is bread for the spirit, and as good as Eileen was at making physical bread, to hear her family tell their stories really reminds us where she shined the brightest. She loved her community, she loved her many lifelong friends, she loved her husband, she loved her children and grandchildren. And that is surely why it's no wonder that when it came to telling the stories of their mom, her children had no trouble finding stories. Their only difficulty was deciding which ones to tell, because let me tell you, between the three of them, they could have gone on all day and probably well into the weekend. When it came to their mom, the stories of their love could have gone on forever. I guess you could say they were well fed with both kinds of bread. The boys agreed that some of their earliest and favorite memories were of Expo. The whole family was captivated by it, and they splurged on season passes, spending days soaking up the sights and sounds and just enjoying every moment. And perhaps Expo is a symbol of life, or maybe even a symbol of afterlife, a celebration of the beauty of this world and its future. Eileen absolutely lost herself in the excitement of the crowds. Literally, she just kept getting lost. But they always knew where to find her, her boys, her husband. They just listened for the joyous music, especially calypso, and that's where they would find Mom. Maybe heaven is something like Expo. Imagine all the musicians who have ever lived performing in one place, all the artists, writers, philosophers, theater, and comedians all in one place. Maybe Eileen is dancing to the calypso right now. but more likely she has found herself in some quiet place at a square dance, perhaps less grand than Expo, but certainly more intimate. And perhaps she's surrounded by family and a few friends, and the music has just started, and she has just found her partner once again, and has taken his hand and walked onto the floor. May they dance all night. And just this once, leave the dishes until the morning. Today we celebrate the life of Eileen Motton, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, friend, community leader, gentle disciple of God, traveler, listener, Jeopardy champ, maker of the best bread, both kinds, and she knew which was the most important. Amen. I invite you now to join me in singing the second hymn that Eileen chose for us, Spirit of Gentleness, number 375. and let us pray. Loving God, before whom the generations rise and pass away, we praise you for all your servants who, having lived this life in faith, now live eternally with you. Especially we thank you for your servant Eileen, now gone from among us. We praise you for the gift of her life, for all in her that was kind and good, and for all that she gave to her community, her church, her family, and all those she inspired and with whom she shared her vision. We thank you that for Eileen all suffering has ended and death itself has passed. We are thankful that she has now entered the joy you have prepared in your eternal home, where one day we will all dwell together. And now, continuing to pray, I invite you to pray the Lord's Prayer with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And now we have some very special music to share. Friends, I offer you this blessing. May God be your comfort and your strength. May God be your hope and support. May God be your light and your way. And the blessing of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Giver of life, remain with you now and forever. Amen. Eileen asked that we finish on a note of joy and celebration, and so she chose the third hymn specially so that we would sing it in joy and celebration, and she couldn't have picked a better one. I Danced in the Morning, Voices United, number 352.